Hey you guys, what's cracking? Godsmith here, coming at you with another video. Today we're going to be talking about some tournament results that we just had down in our Discord here. So as many of you know, the channel actually has a Discord known as the Oathkeeper'S Watch, and we just concluded our January standard tournament. And I wanted to go over here today and highlight some of the decks that topped the event and sort of like go into the reasons why these decks topped and some of the choices that players are making and how the overall matchups went, and just kind of like get my breakdown on how I feel the meta has been shaping up or the past few sets. Now, a couple of things to note, right? This tournament was comprised of a total of 48 players, so a bit big for locals, but not quite at a BCS level or something like that. It actually feels more like something you'd find at like a Springfest or something, if I'm being real. So it was a pretty decent chunk of players, but not the biggest event ever, right? Nevertheless, it was held more or less like an official tournament over, Discord VCs, like it is with a lot of Discord tournaments that you would find in different servers, right? We held it over Untap as the BDM client, even though there was options for like remote play, but everyone did it on Untap, right? Which is a free to play online client that we use in order to play the game. Now, another thing to note about this is that this was up until set 6, right? So as we know, set 7 is currently being revealed, but set 7 was not legal for this format, but everything prior to it, like set 6, Kodo, that was all on the table here. Now, having given that breakdown away, let's go ahead and get into some of the decks that actually topped this tournament and my thoughts on them. So as we see right here, you can get the pie chart for the top 8 cut, right? Again, this was 48 players, so the top 8 here was somewhat necessary as we just hit the threshold of players necessary to actually get a top 8. And as you see, no surprises here that Levidras is taking up a quarter with a couple slots here, but maybe the bigger surprise is that it's only 2 slots. As a lot of us know, Levidras is a massively popular deck, potentially beat IF the format, although I would still argue that it's Reziel because it just has this insane combinations of offense, defense, early aggression, card advantage, recursion, economy. It's just got everything going for it, right? And it's a little bit less peaceful compared to Reziel, compared to Levidras, so that's why I would still rank it above Levidras, but paradoxically, it shows up nowhere on here. It seems that Levidras is still kind of a fan favorite amongst a lot of players, and it did endure over to the top cut here. But then from there, we actually get a really nice variety of different strategies going. We have Ava right over here, which, spoiler, Ava actually ended up winning the event overall, so it was piloted by a very solid player who just understood the fundamentals of the format, just piloted the deck to success. And we're gonna get a little bit more into why I think Ava ended up winning this tournament when we get to reviewing that deck list. Then we have Coral over here. Now, for reference, for those of you who actually frequent my streams, this is actually my deck. I actually wanted to talk to chat about it and say, hey, you know what? I don't feel like bringing something like a meta bust like Reziel or Levidras or whatever, right? So let's bring something a little bit funny and see how well it does. And we kind of came to the conclusion of this sort of like meme Coral build, because Coral's not really that strong of a unit and it has a lot of flaws as a deck strategy, but I actually ended up doing quite well and making it a top cut with Coral. So I'm going to go into a little bit of explanation on why surprisingly it did better than expected, because there are some interesting reasons behind why I think it happened. Then we've got Black over here, we got one Rotoa, we got a Greed on Mask, which yeah, that's surprising, but this one unfortunately we couldn't get a deck list for, but this one was piloted by a previous BCS winner who also topped with Greed on Mask, so this is their bread and butter. And we also had a Leanorn player. So a couple thoughts about the pie chart here is, yeah, Levidras is definitely a favorite deck. We had a lot of Levidras representation, so it does make sense that it would convert into top cut to some degree or another. It was a very strong deck here, but also in general, I'm noticing that the quality card pool of Stoicheia in general was quite high. As you can see, half of the top 8 is Stoicheia units. We got 2 Levi, 1 Lianorn, and even a Roa. And right below them, there were several decks that bubbled out that were actually Maelstrom decks, right? So Maelstrom was also fiercely in contention for the top rung here, which just goes to show how strong and far along the Stoicheia card pool has come along. Just a lot of multi-attack with these decks, a lot of card advantage, good power lines. It's just a very solid nation I've come to find in recent years. Now, having broken down this top 8 here, let's go ahead and get into some of the individual deck lists. But before we do, let me just specify real quick that this is what the top 4 actually looks like. So again, as I stated, Ava won the tournament, and I ended up going second with Coral. Again, I've got a lot of explanation to say about that because I don't think this should have happened, but so it did. Coming in with the bronze is just Andrew with our dear old Black, which, I mean, we could call it better Velstra, I suppose, and I mean, I would actually like to argue that as well, but yeah, this is just a really solid deck that I feel like not a lot of people really prepared to fight in tournament play. It can really catch you by surprise if you don't know what you're looking out for, and of course, it would be amiss if there wasn't at least one Levidras that hit the top 4, albeit it is just the one at 4th place. Probably should have been the bronze, but hey, they were my opponent in the semis, so that's why they ended up in the 4th, but still, very interesting four-way split we got here for the top four. This doesn't really feel terribly indicative of the format. I mean, we have a couple of very notable outliers here. Another one that's more of a tier 2 deck. There's only really one like definite tier 1 potentially BAF deck that's even in this top four, which kind of goes to show that, you know, with the somewhat smaller pool, it was still only 48 players at the end of the day, that there was a lot of like skill expression and just the abilities of pilots who are more experienced with the format and the deck that they're playing to kind of come out of the head of the masses who are actually just playing the, you know, already solved best decks of the format. So let's go ahead and talk about some deck lists here. So starting with a couple of the top 8s, I didn't get all the deck lists for all 8 like lists, unfortunately. So I didn't get the Greedon one, I didn't get the Rotoa one, but I did get some others here, right? So we have the top 8 Levidras, because there was one that didn't even make it past the first top 8 round, and this one was piloted by Lukeson. Now, as we see here, this one is definitely concerned more with sort of the resource game of Levidras. It's running not just the maximum copies of Levies and a bunch of Charmots, you know, all the good stuff, right? It's also having 4 clearances on top of 3 Mythiarch Habitat, which tells me 2 things. One, this was very resource conscientious, because there's so much countercharge and soul building with these clearances going on that they definitely want to play a supremely mid-range build of Levidras. Furthermore, they also did kind of assume some amount of field wipe and field control coming into the matchup, which it is fairly like that is fair to assume, because Vargadragras and Odium, which surprisingly didn't even make top cut here, perhaps they weren't really all that popular in this tournament, because I didn't really see many of them get played in this tourney. Those probably could have been kind of bad for Levidras to lose a lot of those pieces there. So I think the player in question like made a meta call that the field removal would be like more prevalent, and when it didn't, the value of these cards kind of went down substantially. So this could be said to be kind of a bad meta call. I also see there's no Asperonium, which is the grade 2 dual nation for Keter Sanctuary and Stoicheia, right? And that one gives you a lot of early game and recursion as well, but more importantly is the form, which is that early game, because it lets you rush back against the opponent. When I saw them in tournament play, they were only like riding Manta Scythe and generally swinging and passing, so they sort of lost out on the potential to get some early damage in here. Again, it's more of a mid-range Levidras, but unfortunately that mid-range didn't serve them too well, but it did get them to the top cut at least, so very well done there. Now, another top 8 list we saw is the Lianorn list. Now, as you see here, this Lianorn list like just has all of the good stuff Lianorn they could ask for. You of course got like Rosarium Fairy, the best beat stick of the deck. You've got your Luster Impact Dragon, gives you draws, a really strong booster, just a very good combination of advantage and power. We've got the new Searcher that can go ahead and fetch you any of the Lianorns. This is your counter charger. You're running your energy cyclers for more draws, and then of course we have the Mask Engine, which is a very popular choice for most Lianorn builds, because when going second they can really slam against the opponent here, which was a very dangerous and successful strategy. And I believe that this aspect, this ability to clap back, was really key for Lianorn, because it meant it didn't really lose out on the die roll. As a matter of fact, I actually faced off against this deck in the top 8 cut as my first round in top 8, and it very nearly killed me, right? It came down to 1 to passing the Lianorn Vavash. I ended up actually making that 1 to pass, it didn't break, and that was the game. But it pushed me to the limits to like a degree that I hadn't seen prior in the tournament, so it was very scary and aggressive. A couple other things to note about this build here. Like this Mask Engine is pretty robust, but like not too robust. You're having 3 Vavash, you have 3 Vavash, and you also have 3 Masco. We're not even maximizing Honor Vavashes here, so there is kind of an assumption that you're probably going to mask up in the meantime before riding into Vavash, which is the same difference, so go figure. But in addition to the Mask Engine, we're also running a couple of, you know, effect heals. This effect heal has like the effect to give 15,000 shield when it's guarding against a unit that is attacked 2 or more times this turn. So this effect heal is very effective against restanding units, which is a bit of an interesting meta call, because 2 of the BDAFs of the format, that being Rezael as well as Levidras, don't really fall prey into this. They don't have restanding units, right? This is better off against a Vargadragras, but even then, you know, it's not going to clutch up against Vargadragras that much, even though it's kind of a neat option. Then from there, it's not as effectual against even things like Lealodium, for instance. So I don't know, this feels like kind of a weak choice in my opinion. The crit Turamore might have even been potentially better if you're thinking about matchups like Blankmeyer or against Zorga, which has a Roaming Prison Dragon and also Abomination Karma, as those are definitely situations where having a really beefy heal could make the big difference, right? So I wanted to bring that up. Now, of course, one other last thing to note is, as you see, we have 3 Mythiarch Habitat, which, you know, I mean, it makes sense. It's a really strong Stoicheia order. It's one of the generics of Stoicheia that's really like bumped it up as a nation overall, right? It's the rising tide, like the rising wave that lifts all boats. but this has actually been expanded upon a little bit more, because as we see over here, here's the ride line for Leanorn. So of course we're running like the Roa grade 1, which can generate you a token, which actually has a really interesting combo, because Rosarian Fairy, it retires the rear guard to generate 2 tokens. So traditionally what this player did, they would call the token off the ride line, call the Rosarian Fairy, sack token, call 2 tokens, and then he had Rosarian Fairy swing for 8 on rear, swing for 8 with Van, and then swing for 10 with a token column. So it was traditionally just a very easy 3 swing turn, and then from there they would start calling down Luster Impact, maybe the counter charger, because there's really no consequence to calling them down. A lot of their effects are predicated on like during battle or just continuous skills, so you don't really miss out on places for the most part of this deck, which is a really unsung strength of Leanorn. It's a very fast strategy, and in this tournament it ended up taking down a lot of strike deck set matchups in particular, so they definitely would choo and just steamrolled them. One final thing to know about this list is that we're actually running very questionably Blacktear's Husk Dragon. So this of course is meant to recycle back particularly your Mythiarch habitat that you would use on grade 1. Again, these don't really lose out on being like called right away for the most part, particularly with Rosarian Fairy or the counter charger. So you just play Mythiarch Habitat, call them out, and then next turn you get it back with Blacktear's Husk Dragon. But I don't know if I agree with this, right? As I saw in tourney, this player actually did whiff this a fair bit, so it turned out to be a scenario where their grade 2 ride line did absolutely nothing, and that doesn't feel good. It might have been a little bit better to try and go for the grade 2 Roa to get more tokens and just have a really easy time constantly swinging against the opponent, but I can see why they didn't opt for this, because at some point they're going to have to make room for their more high value units, because a board full of tokens is only going to be useful in the early game. When you get to Leanorn, you're going to want something a little bit beefier for your girl, right? So I can see why they didn't want to like rely too much on the tokens, but still, it is a little bit odd here that they are running this little order engine as a way to compensate, especially because we don't have that many grade 1 or lesses that are worth calling, just a couple targets. So one last thing to note, there is 4 draw triggers here and 7 crits, which is a bit odd because we have a restanding Vanguard, and you could even like restand front rows, but you think that you'd expand a little bit more on crits, but it's a minor issue, so I guess they really just needed to see pieces as much as possible, so it's worthy bringing this up alongside the discussion of Mythiarch Habitat. Overall, it's a pretty personalized list, and I can see why it did very well because just the sheer speed and aggression of Leanorn. Generally speaking, not a lot of decks really survive past turn 4 with this beast when it actually got to go, especially if it went first, but also if it went second because of Mask, which is arguably even better for it. Now, moving on to top 4, we actually thankfully got all of the top 4 cut decks. So we got the Levidras, Black, Coral, and Ava all to talk about here. So starting out with the 4th place list, we have Levidras, of course, and this Levidras is a little bit more typical to what you'd usually find in tournament play, although there is still a couple things about it that I'm a little iffy about, right? But still, overall, very good list, right? So as you see, you're running the traditional ride line with Imperial in the ride deck with max copies of both Imperio and also only 2 regular Levidras. Now, 2 regular Levidras here, and then you got 1 here, so that might look a little strange because it's like, why are you not running the 4th Levidras? Because you would want to maximize that as much as possible. That's kind of questionable, right? But also, we're running In the Dim Darkness, which is an order that mills the one of the top 3 cards of the deck, and then you revive a card with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard for the drop zone. So it's a lot like Spiritual Body Condensation, but it mills off top 3 in exchange for not giving 5,000 power to the unit that it calls with its effect. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there, and it seems very toolboxy in nature, but still, it's a bit of a debatable choice, especially because there's not really a lot of order synergy going on here, right? And on top of that, it might be a little bit of a redundancy because I have plenty of a field revival with the effects of Sharma, Huli, and Asperonia, which I do agree in running Asperonia. 3 copies should be sufficient. 4 is probably better, especially because you have the CP to work with in this deck, realistically speaking. But still, it is nice that we at least see this card here. We also see a lower amount of clearances, but still a couple clearances, which is, you know, a fair choice. And also the one of Squirrel, because Squirrel can make for some really devastating power plays, particularly when you boost with it as a unit, right? You can make some dummy strong columns that puts the squeeze on the opponent. So that much I really don't argue against with. And then of course, there's a couple ratios like Foxhill, and then you have running the Twin Cast, which just seems to be a very popular choice in a lot of builds these days. So I don't question that at all. But still, overall, again, kind of like the Leanorn Lianorn list, it's somewhat personalized, and it seems like we're seeing a lot of like recursion conscious builds of Levidras here. When I played this in top 4, they were placing a lot of markers on the opponent's side of the field, aka my side of the field, and also their other opponents, in order to draw more cards and keep like negging power, right? So I think similarly to the top 8 version, there seems to be more of a mid-range type of game style going on here, but this one seemed to work out better because the ratios here were a little bit more conducive with some amount of early game aggression, because both of these can really like clap back against your opponent as soon as turn 2 rolls around, which is why I believe personally did a little bit better versus the top 8 variant. But still, overall, not a bad list whatsoever. I do like it for the most part. Now going on to the 3rd place, we've got Black. Now this one was honestly probably my favorite entry. I think this is a very criminally underrated deck, right? Now it can get kind of, it's very piece reliant, it gets a bit gimmicky, you can also use up a lot of resources, but man, does this deck hit like an effing truck, especially when you find out that this deck can do a lot of things that Velstra cannot. So let's go into it. As you know, we're running the original ride line for Velstra. I mean the actual original set 7 ride line all the way back in Overdress era, right? As that's the only one that really interacts with Black on a meaningful basis. Then you see a lot of like the usual suspects here. We're maxing out Fright Height. We're getting 3 Fenlictas. I might have wanted opted for 4 personally, but still 3 is definitely plenty here. 3 Baldress for consistency. And you're also seeing a couple of this guy right here, which is Ainz. Now Ainz has the ability to put itself into the soul and draw a card, so that's pretty nice for getting you more resources and hand advantage. But then we're also seeing Virginia here. Virginia, just more of an emphasis on getting resources advantage, and it's another way to play your products during the main phase. One of the things that really gets Black like an advantage over the Velstra version is that there are more ways to operate during the main phase traditionally. Black himself has the ability to discard and then operate, and it gets triple drive if you have 3 or more products in your order zone, right? So this is a good way to add stability and card advantage, but also gets you the operates right away. And that's super nice because if your opponent has a very defense inclined field, you're able to strip them away of potential shields on the field and take out their power during the main phase so that even your very first attacks can hit for as much as humanly possible. So there's a good advantage to that. Now, in addition to that, we're also running 4 copies of Astray here. Now, this is a very strong card that Black in particular has a much easier time using compared to Velstra. Now, with this skill, when it's discarded, you're able to put it in the soul to either countercharge 2 countercharge 1 or energy charge 2, excuse me. And both of these are very powerful resources. In addition, it's a 10k shielder and also 13k booster / attacker. So it's just one of the most versatile blitz reinforcements that you could have in a product-based deck, and Black uses it even better than Velstra. So it's really nice to see this played a lot of copies, and combined with things like Ainz, you can tell that there was a lot more resource consciousness going on with this one. Uni the Sky seems to be the card of choice here for regardless pieces, so you either burn a Counterblast or Energy Blast through to get the draw, and it also could be a pretty hefty blitz order shield just in case of like last-ditch efforts to guard yourself. So this is just kind of like even keeled. A lot of these decks seem to really opt for more of the consistent, reliable methods rather than trying to high roll here, which definitely is a little bit more indicative of the Western philosophy of tournament play compared to what you would see in a lot more like Japanese shops, where there's not as many rounds to consider, so they can more reliably play high rolls and expect to do decently well with it. Now, there's a couple things here that are a bit interesting and perhaps even questionable. For one thing, we have 2 Fright Shoots of maximum only, which is a bit dangerous because if you damage check a maximum, you only got 1 maximum at your disposal. Now, I think the philosophy behind this is that even with 1 maximum, you can still get a lot of value out of it because you can operate and repeat it during the main phase and then also call it during the main phase off like any of your operate skills, whether that be Virginia, Fenlicta, or Black himself. And then Black has a secondary skill that when it attacks, you're able to counterblast 1 and stand one of your rear cards, which is sort of the Astrum-esque effect that it inherited, right? So what you would do is restand maximum, so you kind of get a double dip on that huge beater with all the power decreasing that you inflicted upon your opponent's Vanguard. So I can kind of see why you can run a lesser ratio, but it is still a little bit avant-garde because if you damage check 1, that does limit your options, and if for some reason you whiff on like 2 of them, then you're just kind of dead in the water at that point. So it might have been worth it to play 3, but I can see the argument for why not. Although I will say it's also a little bit dangerous because unfortunately this ride line, unlike the Divine Welstra ride line, doesn't automatically search maximum from deck to hand, so you are super beholden to seeing something like your Fright Height in order to actually dig out a maximum in the first place and set it. So that's a little bit dubious right there. Having said that, we're of course running the 1 dog. We're also only running 3 Lianorn. I've seen some variants run like 4, but 3 is also just plenty, and you just operate during the main phase, build back your board. So black has that like good added benefit of being able to constantly churn out use of Lianorn in order to get back its field. And then interestingly, we're running 1 copy of Yugioh. So this might seem a little bit puzzling because you can only operate Yugioh off the skill of your Velstra with a divine skill ability, right? But here's the thing, that only applies to its main effect. Yugioh, when it's placed in the order zone, will still draw a card and energy charge 3, and it's that generic implication that's really useful for black, because one of the plays that you can do is you can loop your Finlictas, and this is what I mean. So during the main phase, you use Finlicta, right? You operate maximum, use maximum skill, call to rearguard circle by bouncing back Finlicta. Finlicta's not hard once per turn, so you then recall the Finlicta and energy blast 4 again. And this gives you access to that particular play because you don't really have like energy charge methods outside of this for the most part. You could run things like Safer if you wish, although this deck isn't doing it, and I feel like that's perfectly fine and balanced that way. So this is just good for more Finlicta abuse, which is just a hallmark of the black strategy. Overall, I'd say this is a pretty effective list. It's very aggressive. It has good counterpoint plays. It's fairly versatile in what it could operate here, whether you want to build backboard for advantage or just like go for maximum right away. And just the fact that you can operate maximum during the main phase a bunch, get the triple drive, reuse the Finlictas, restand the maximum. There's a lot of good value going on here. So overall, I think this is definitely a fairly underrated list, and it's no wonder that it was topping a good chunk not too long ago in the meta. Now, moving on to the second place list. Oh boy, I need to take a sip for this one because I've got some explaining to do. All right, here we go. So I brought Aurora Star Coral to tournament, and this was, of course, as I mentioned before, kind of a meme choice. I did not expect Coral to do very well, right? Now, to explain what Coral does, because as a lot of people may not know, and that actually included a lot of the competitors, which is going to be a key point later on when I give my deck analysis here. Not a lot of people know how Coral works. So Aurora Star Coral here has the effect that it has 3 effects. First of all, this continuous skill that all of your corals get shield plus 5,000. This includes your grade 3 corals. So your corals are just beefy shields. The second skill is 2 of its main skills. So act on the Vanguard circle, you can put a card from Hand of the Soul and draw a card. Very generic. But if you put in a coral, then you get the ability to restand any of your rear guards at the end of the battle that coral attacks. This isn't grade lock whatsoever. You just need to put in any coral. This could be something like one of the 1s or 2s, which is what you want to do. Or if you get desperate, you can put in a Persona Ride or even a copy of the starter, which we are running max copies in the main deck because we need to be seeing this restand skill at all times. So I maximize the consistency of seeing that. The third and final skill is sort of like the cherry on top, the thing that really brings the offense together, which is that at the beginning of the battle phase, you can energy blast a whopping 4 energy in order to give your front row 10,000 power for every 2 corals in your soul. So Coral is a soul-based ramp deck that is looking specifically for the coral name. And as the game goes on, it constantly scales in power and gets increasingly dummy thick numbers as long as you keep building corals. And this in combination with the generic restand of any rear guard makes it a pretty beefy 4 attack turn, right? And the numbers here do get pretty daunting at a time, right? Generally speaking, on turn 3, you're looking at 10,000 power right away, even against grade 2 opponents. So it's like Impaldio numbers, but if you had a restand to go with it, albeit no extra drive checks there. But then turn 4 is where it gets really serious, because generally speaking, if you're seeing the pieces that you should be seeing, including a Persona Ride, then you're going to be looking at around 25,000 power to the front row. And then from there, depending on how you play it, turn 5 is like 30 or even 35,000 power to the front row. So these are just wildly huge numbers, and this deck is like meant to be a ramp strategy that just gets bigger and bigger as later the game goes on, as I've made apparent. But this ramp strategy here was kind of intriguing because it's very, very fragile as a deck, right? So not only are you super reliant on seeing your corals, of which you're going to have a total of 3, 6, 9, 12 targets in the main deck, which is pretty good to dig, but there are chances that you may not be able to have those corals in hand, especially if it turns out you don't have other pieces here to try and replenish them, and you may have to actually end up calling your corals or risk not having a good board to maximize on the power of that huge front row power-ups, right? So it's very piece reliant, and sometimes it's prone to bricking if it doesn't see the corals. And it sort of sucks that when you're guarding with corals for the nice tasty extra shield, you're actively hampering your ability to consistently see the full value of your axe skill to get the restand. So there's a little bit of incongruence to this deck list as well. And like I said, it's very reliant on its generics, right? So we're running 4 Strega and 3 Franchette. These are the 2 Gangbuster units. These units are the main reason why Coral did so well, in my opinion, right? Strega has the skill that when you play it in order, you're able to Soul Blast or look at the top 5 and call a card, right? Now, this is a bit of a dangerous effect, right? Because Soul Blasting means that you're Soul Blasting a Coral. So you're going to actively hurt your power. And I kind of ran into that issue a lot in tournament play because I had to make the concerted choice of which one was more valuable. Potentially plussing a strong piece off top 5, potentially, mind you, or having an extra increment of 5,000 power to the front row, because it might tick me down to an odd number, particularly on turn 3, where again, you're usually going to be at about 4 Coral and Soul. Taking yourself down to 3 only means 5,000 power to the front row there. So it was kind of a tough choice that way, but you don't have to use that effect. The main effect that made Strega valuable was the second skill, where if it was placed this turn, when it attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, you can counterblast 1 in order to draw a card and give it 10,000 power until end of turn. That means that this not once per turn skill, mind you, can be activated twice, because when you restand with Coral, you swing again, get another 10,000 power until end of turn, and another draw. So this was your main source of CB value in the deck, as Coral doesn't have any counterblast. The only cost it realistically has is Energy Blast, right? And then this, of course, is a countercharger, and then we have Rurica here, which is also a countercharger. So you had so much counterblast to burn here, and that's how I chose to use it, right? In addition to that, you have access to Franchette, which gave this deck a lot of early game potential by attacking a bunch and then bouncing back the defensive cards like a PG or a critical trigger or whatever back to the hand after using it to substantiate your early aggression. So Franchette makes your deck a very consequence-free kind of deck if you see it, which you may not see it. And if I high rolled in this tournament, I'll admit I very much high rolled by constantly seeing these cards. If I didn't see these cards, I was dead in the water, which is one of the reasons why I ended up losing in the final round, because I finally didn't high roll. And Coral is a very fragile deck if it doesn't see its pieces both in hand and on field constantly. One other thing to note about Coral as a deck, right, is I'm running a couple of interesting choices here, right? So this is an order that's meant to enable Strega, right? This is Super Static Shot. Now, Super Static Shot for the price of a Counterblast, which, as I've explained before, is pretty easy stuff, right? You're able to get 5,000 power to all of your rear guards continuously this turn, which means a cumulative 30,000 power maximum for the most part if you get the restand off and you have 3 boosters in the back row. So that's pretty freaking good value, I might say, for Super Static Shot, but it also does get a little bit redundant with your dummy thick numbers. But, you know, against things like Levidras with minuses 10k and gets the draw and a lot of, you know, hand advantage overall, you never know when you could push them into a situation of being 5k short. So that's pretty real, I'm not gonna lie. Furthermore, one avant-garde feature of this deck is that I'm running Volnute. Now, Volnute is a very weak overtrigger in the modern day. Not a lot of people run this one compared to some of the nation-in overtriggers, or even some of the stronger generic prey elementals like Idospharo or Night Sky, right? The reason I'm running Volnute here is that Red OT actually has good synergy with my main generics, right? Recall that both of these cards have really powerful on-attack skills. This one gets 5,000 power, again, until end of turn, and bounces back at end of battle, right? This is not once per turn. This is CB for 10k and draw, not once per turn. So with Volnute here, if you have the Wonder Duo in the front row, because this should be in your hand, as should this be, then you can restand them for double attack in addition to their initial attack, and you could be using their effects one more time than you normally would have. So that could be another 5k and bounce, or that could be another draw, right? So it's just got a really good combo synergy. And ultimately, I came to the conclusion that the nation-specific trigger of Lyrical is not that useful here, because again, your numbers are always so big, that probably doesn't make much of a difference. difference, right? But you never know when the extra bounce or draw might make more of a difference. Now, I almost ran a Bright Sky for the extra draws and field nuke. That actually could have been a pretty interesting choice here, but you know, sometimes this deck could actually like dig a fair bit of my deck out after a while. So I didn't know if Bright Sky was actually a good choice here because I was a little bit afraid of the draws, which might seem a little bit crazy, but we ran into some really grindy decks here, including the final deck, right? Now, overall, I'd say it's a pretty fun deck. It's more like tier 3, 2.5-ish. It wasn't all that strong because it had a lot of flaws that I had to compensate for with, like, you know, just player skill and being able to read certain game states, right? Now, one thing I will know about why I think it did so well is because absolutely nobody researched the Coral matchup. Nobody knew what this deck did. So when I went into tournament, people would like not expect the level of just like blowback power that I was bringing to the table there, and they ended up dying because they didn't stock up on defensive cards like they should have because they weren't expecting such a huge front row power up. Another thing that people did, which was a very, very big error, is they would sometimes try to damage deny me, right? So I would actually like block the first attack with the trigger if I could, right? And try to stay on 0 damage so that when I early rush, they might attack my remaining rear guard and think, hey, well, now he can't counterblast right in his plays. I caught him in a misplay. But they didn't, because the only CB I need is draws or maybe retinere to return back a coral, but both of these can wait a turn. They're just like nice to have recursion and draw pieces, right? They're not integral to the core gimmicks because this coral is only energy blast, and these corals, when they move into soul, give you additional benefits. This gets you 5k to the Vanguard and the triple drive ability, much like black, and this one gets you an additional draw on top of coral's draw, as well as an energy charge of 5k to a rear guard. Neither of these cost anything. They are costless, just conditional. So when they would CB deny me, and I ran into this situation 3 times in tournament play, I just went along with my day, and ultimately they missed out on a pretty good chance to nail some early damage on me, and then made my job a whole lot easier in finishing the fight with the W, right? So I think that the element of surprise was a really big boon for Coral, but also just being able to like pilot through certain like scenarios and know what to do with the pieces you're granted, because this deck definitely is very like field sensitive. So I had to make a lot of decisions on when to commit, when not to commit, and I think that if I had ran into more field control matchups, I would have been a bit of a pickle, because losing out on all my pieces every turn is kind of bad for Coral, right? Because it is piece sensitive. Thankfully, a lot of my matchups were not control matchups, so I was mostly in the clear. So I got a little bit lucky with those matchups as well. But that's basically all I have to say about Coral. Overall, it's okay, I suppose. It's a really fun deck. If you want to try it out for yourselves and see if you like it or not, be my guest there. Now, finally, the last deck to talk about is Ava. Now, Ava ended up sweeping the whole tournament. I actually fought this in the top round of Swiss and then again in the finals. So Ava only ever lost once in tourney, much like I did, and there's a very good reason why. Now, played by Kaito Regal here, this Ava list really emphasizes the power of deck compression. So many of its pieces are all about putting back cards that you need to see in deck, as well as pulling cards that you need to see in hand and field, right? This Ava pulls a research order, this Ava pulls research orders. This Ava has the ability to dig off a certain select amount of cards from top of deck. You scry a certain amount of cards based on the number of your research orders and pull anyone you want. And then you have the ability of your habitable zone to search for another set order and set it immediately. Voltrosa lets you bot deck a card of your choice from the drop zone, as long as it's a normal unit without Sentinel, which is very useful because you need to constantly see your obfuscates in the deck to call, as well as your persona rides in order to secure your persona ride off the effect of Ermiker, which is by far the most powerful of the glitter ride fixers. Now, interestingly enough, right, I guess I should call it Ride Skipper. Now, Ava here is only be ran at 2 copies, and this might be a little bit like daunting, because you would have to wonder what happens if you just run out of the 2. Well, see, what happens is you soul blast one out, and the next turn you use the effects of, say, the aforementioned Voltrosa, or you can also use the effects of one of your research orders, like the new grade 2 order, which bot decks one of your cards from the drop zone, or this other research order, which can like different cards that could do that effect, right? And just ultimately recycle your cards constantly. This deck has so much of recycling and just a cyclical nature to its game plan that it's virtually impossibly choked out of any of your pieces. You also have access to just really nice like resourcing in all areas. You only need Energy Blast for Ermiger, so your energy is just like for one super useful card, and that's it. You can't get choked on that. Your Counter Blast is called for because you actually have your 3 research orders here. This grade 1 research order, which allows you to put into the soul and counter charge, which by the way, this builds soul, this builds soul, this ride technically builds soul at the end of turn. You're building soul left and right, and you have great ways of using your soul. This is the freezing blast, which is a very, very cool tech choice that I saw Ava and even dimensional robos, right? But particularly Ava in this tournament teching in a lot, right? Because with its effect, it's a blitz order that soul blasts 1 in order to give 10,000 power to the unit being attacked for every rest order that you have in your order zone, right? Now, this blue research lab is key for that because it rests 3 orders in Soul Blast to give 5,000 power to a unit of your choice. In addition, this one rests itself for the cost of one of its effects as well. So you're looking at like the ability to just rest basically all of your set orders for this dummy thick power gain that also gets around most guard restricts, including Blanked Myers. So that's really powerful. Interestingly enough, we're not seeing Elementarius Sanctitude being ran here, and instead opting for just the 4 regular PGs, and this is likely to make room for Freezing Blast as your blitz order of choice, which is a fairly smart maneuver because there isn't a lot of decks in this format where that Elementarius Sanctitude is really going to come up. Levidras wouldn't demand it unless they're randomly running Godbreak for some reason, which is not a popular choice. There's no way for Rezile to make it matter because it gets an extra drive, not the triple drive ability, and then you look at Varga Dragres, there's no real guard restricts going on there, so that doesn't matter. Then you look at Odium. Odium is one where you kind of miss out a little bit because Odium actually has the triple drive ability, so that sucks a little bit, but it's not a big loss, right? Mostly it's guard restricts this would get around, but no one really brought Luar to this freaking format, and I guess it makes sense. Luar has really fallen out of favor, especially compared to a couple of the other stronger strike deck sets like Messiah and Chronojet, which just recently got beefed up with new support cards. So because of that, I think it was a very smart decision on their part to not even run the Elementary Sanctitude. It's just not all that valuable. You might as well like try to omit like the chase, like the case scenario that you just brick on this by having this and another blitz order in the hand. In addition, they're running other recursion pieces, right? So Obfuscate is one big recursion piece, but then of course Valtrosa's recursion piece. Ermiger revives itself for the drop zone every turn as long as you played a research order for Energy Blast 3. And when you do play that research order from the hand, you can also call back Combine Rusher for a counter blast. So it doesn't matter if you nuke the field, it doesn't matter if you run out of a piece of the deck, you can throw it back. It doesn't matter if your opponent like survives like the turn. You have a lot of really good shield value with like this blitz order here and just drawing a lot of cards. It doesn't matter if you choked out a resource because you can get back your soul, you can get back your counter blast, you don't need energy blast for hardly anything. This deck just has like almost no flaws. The only thing about it is that Ava doesn't like rack up too much advantage like right off the bat unless it high rolls. So against especially fast decks, you might be able to destabilize it before it can really get its groove going, right? Because in order to really set up the cyclical nature of this entire strategy, you need to kind of get the gears turning for a bit and just start overwhelming your opponent. But your opponent might just like spearhead through that and you never get a chance to. But still, through like expert piloting and just really understanding the fundamentals of their deck, it's very clear that Kaito was just able to really dominate most of this tournament just with that good strategy, right? Oh, and one final thing to note here is this Regardless piece, right? So like I said, this whole deck is about searching, deck compression, and also recursion. This is a card that you can play without using your normal order play for turn, so it doesn't get in the way of playing your research orders, mind you. This will also get you a card off the top 5 and can actually be used from the drop zone, so you don't even need it in the hand. It's another way of using a piece that has been lost to you. Maybe you healed out the damage zone or something. It just compounds on everything else so beautifully. And of course the offense is there, right? I mean, Obfuscate gets a critical whenever it's called by the ability. This can attack the front row. It's just overall a super nuts deck with not a lot of flaws to it. So yeah, very well done to the person who won this tournament. It was a very well-deserved victory, and honestly, I look forward to seeing them play in the future here. And that is going to do it for our overall tournament. So this was like my overall analysis. I think this analysis really goes to show that there is a lot of player expression and experimentation going to a lot of these decks. And furthermore, it appears that like some amount of mid-range and plan B is being taken into account with most of the topping lists, right? It appears that your ceiling is kind of secondary in importance to your reliability as a deck list, as we see with all these relatively reliable decks, with the exception of Coral and also perhaps Black, but Black also has a lot of searchability, so it's fairly reliable, right? So having a reliable deck is perhaps more important than having a powerful deck, as we see. And with the overall defensive power creep of Defiance as time goes on, this could be understandable. I mean, heck, Levidras is kind of a walking defensive power creep with the Infinity Eye mark when we really consider everything. So yeah, it just goes to show. Also, a lot of these decks tend to like have ways of coming back from a field beatdown. Even decks that we didn't talk about, like Rotowa here, can also just regrow most of its field in the blink of an eye. So there seems to be a lot of anti-field control. So for anyone who's playing a control-based strategy in this format, they're probably going to have a hard time, because most players are just not going to let that be too effective, unfortunately. So that's another thing that I really noted with these topping lists. And that's going to do it for this tournament analysis. Again, a big round of applause to everyone who managed to make the top table here. It was no easy feat, let me tell you. Although it was only 48 players, and that may seem small at first glance, that's actually pretty good for a tournament turnout, especially in a Discord server. And let me tell you, even if we were lacking a little bit in quantity in your eyes, I certainly can't say in quality. We had a lot of really strong competitors here, including a few like tournament accomplished players. So the competition was fierce, and a lot of really interesting and powerful builds, some very creative and very personalized that people weren't expecting. Super tense games, very, very fun fights, and overall just a super enjoyable experience that I wish to repeat with this next upcoming tournament, which, by the way, if you want to be a part of, then do be my guest. Down in the description below, we do have a link to the Oathkeeper'S Watch Discord server where you can go and sign up to be a part of the next tournament, which should be sometime in February, and set 7 that's coming out for Divine should be legal by that point. So if you're trying to take another one of the new spin decks, like maybe Vicerug, Polyphonic, Bavsagada, Serafagila, what have you, then they should be legal for that tournament. So go ahead, hop on in, make yourself at home, and get ready for the next big tournament. And with all that said, if you guys have any thoughts or opinions on how this tourney format went down, or just the format in general, maybe even your thoughts on how the format will progress from here in the future, do let me know down below. I do read your comments and would be very curious to find out what the general consensus is on standard at the time being. And having said that, if you're looking for other Vanguard content in the meantime, then look no further. We've got top 10s, anime reactions, fight nights, the whole shebang, so check it out. There's a lot to love. And if you like what you see, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. And with all that said, take care, God bless.